Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to add authentication to a REST API using JSON Web Tokens. Now, this is actually part 2 of a MERN stack series, but I do just want to quickly explain the current code that we have, just in case you didn't watch the first video where we created the REST API. So basically, we have a CRUD API. We can create, read, update, and delete goals. So we can make a GET request to our API/goals, and we can fetch them. Right now, I don't have any. I actually deleted all of them. But we can also make a POST request to add a goal. We can make a PUT request to update, and we can make a delete request to delete a goal. So that's the extent of the functionality. And then this is the folder structure here. So in the backend folder, we have our server.js. We have API goals going to our goal routes, which is this folder here, or this file here. And then we have some functions from the controller that we're bringing in and setting to certain endpoints. So / and then /ID. And we have our functions in our controller. So here you can see we have get goals, which just fetches them from MongoDB using Mongoose, set goal, we have update goal, and we have delete goal. And then we just created a custom error handler as well. So that's pretty much what we did in the first video. So now, like I said, I want to add authentication so that not just anybody can come to these endpoints and get and set and update and delete goals. All right, now just to talk a little bit about JSON Web Tokens and what they are. This is JWT.io. This is the official site for JSON Web Tokens. And if we scroll down to us, this is what the token actually looks like, which kind of just looks like a mess, but that's because it's encoded. But there's actually 3 different parts, and you can see they've color-coded them. And the first part is the header, which includes the algorithm and the token type, which is JSON Web Token is the type. And then it includes some data in JSON, in the JSON format, and you can have whatever you want in your token. In our case, we're going to have the user ID. So it also has an issued at, which is the timestamp that the token was issued at. And then it also has a signature, which will ensure that the JWT hasn't been altered with or tampered with in any way. And the party that creates the token signs the header and payload with a secret that's known to the issuer and the receiver, or a private key that's known only to the issuer. So basically, when we have a route, we want to be able to protect it, and we'll have to log in, get the token, and send the token in the headers to access that protected route. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this particular video. And then in the next video, we should be able to start on the front end. So let's first create in models here. Since users is going to be a new resource, we're going to create a new file in models called user model.js. And if you watch the first video, you know that in here we put our schema and all the fields that we want to a user to have. We have to bring in Mongoose, which is our ODM to interact with MongoDB. And we can also use it to create our schemas and models. So let's bring in Mongoose, and then let's create a user schema, basically the fields that we want a user to have. So we set this to mongoose.schema. We want to pass in an object here and then add our fields. So as far as the fields go, we're going to have a name, and we're going to give that a type of string. And we do want this to be required, so we're going to say required, and we can do true and then add a message here like please add a name. Okay, so that's the name, and then what I'll do is just copy this down. We'll do 4 times, and then the second field that we want is an email. All right, so we'll say email, the type is going to be string, required, true, and then we'll just change the message to please add an email. And we do want this to be unique as well, so I'm going to add in unique, and we're going to set that to true, okay, because we don't want 2 of the same email addresses. And then the password, say password, that's going to be type of a string. And we'll say please add a password. And then Yeah, I think that that should do it. If you want to have other things, of course you could. If you wanted to add like phone number or anything like that, if you have different, you know, you could have admin, different roles, things like that. But this is going to be pretty simple. So that's all we're going to have actually. Now I do want timestamp fields. So after this, after the schema, we can put in a set of curly braces and we can just say timestamp or timestamps and set that to true. And that will automatically give us a created at and updated at field. All right, so now we just need to export. So we'll say module exports our mongoose model. And the model name is going to be user. And then the schema is the user schema that we just created. So we can go ahead and close that up. Now I'm going to open up the goal model because with every goal, we have to know which user created that goal. Okay, every goal is going to be associated with a specific user. So we're actually going to add a field here. So I'm going to go above text and we're going to call this user. And just make sure you put a comma after that. So as far as the type goes, the type is actually going to be mongoose.schema.types and then .object ID. Okay, so when we have our, underscore ID field when we create a new resource, that's an object ID. So what we're saying is we want this type to be an object ID. And we also want it to be required. So let's say required, set that to true. And then we need to add a reference because we need to know which model does this object ID pertain to, and it's going to be the user. So we add a ref field. So we say ref, and then the name of the model, which in this case is going to be user. All right, so that will allow us to have a user associated with a goal. Okay, so we're going to just do that, save that, close that up. So next thing, let's see, let's create a new routes folder, or file. So a file called user routes.js. And in our server.js, since we added a new route file, we need to add it here. So I'm just going to copy this line down and let's set this to routes and then user routes, and it's going to be API/users. Okay, so now that will pertain to that file. We're going to get an error for now just because we have nothing in this user routes. So now let's start adding our routes, and we're going to have three routes. One is going to be to register or create a user, one is going to be to log in, and one is going to be to get the user's information. So first of all, we need to bring in express, just like we did in the goal routes. So we want to require express, and then we're going to create our router. So let's say express dot and then router. And let's make sure that we export that. So we want a module exports equals router. All right, so let's see. We're going to say router.post. So basically, when we make a post request to /, which in this case is going to be /API/users, remember when we post, that's to add a resource, right? So we're going to be adding a user with a post request, and that's basically a registration. So when we hit that route, we're going to want to call a controller function called register user. All right, now we don't have that yet. We haven't even created our controller, so we'll do that in a second, but let's bring it in. So we'll say const register user, and that's going to come from require, and let's see, we want to go outside of the routes into controllers, and then it's going to be user controller. All right, so we'll create that now. So let's go into controllers, create a new file here called user controller.js, and let's create the register user function. It's going to take in request response, and we need an arrow here. And then for now, let's just do a res.json, and we'll just say, actually, let's say message register user, and then we need to export. So let's say module dot exports and register user. Okay, so now we shouldn't see any errors down here, and if we go to a new tab, and instead of goals, we're going to make a post request to API/users, and let's send that, and we should see a message register user. Now we're also going to have, actually let's add our little header here that I like to add, so just the description and stuff like that. So this is going to register a new user, and the method is post, and it's going to be API/users, and it's going to be public, obviously, because you can't access a protected route without being logged in, and you can't log in without being registered. So let's take this and let's copy that down. So this one here, description, let's say login, or we'll say authenticate a user, and this one is going to be a this is going to be a post request as well, but instead of API users, it's going to be API/login, and that's going to be public as well. And let's say login user, and then we'll just respond with login user, and then this one here we'll just say get user data, and I want this to go to API/users me, and this is going to be a get request, and basically it'll be able to get the current logged in user because we'll be sending the token, and you get the ID from that token. Okay, so we'll just call this get, we'll say get me, and we'll just say user data display or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then down here, let's export login user, and let's export get me, and then bring those into our routes. So let's see, these are all going to be different endpoints, so I guess we can just copy this down. So this will be post to /login, and the function will be login user, and then this one here will be get me, and it'll be /me, and we just want to bring in up here login user and get me. All right, so let's try those routes out. I'll go ahead and make a post request to /login, and we get login user. And if I make a get request, we'll do this, we'll open up another tab for this, and this one will be user/me, get request, send, and 404 not found. Oh, I need to change this. This needs to be get. All right, so now we get user data display. Good, so now at least we have the route set up. So first thing I want to do, or I should say next thing I want to do, is the register user functionality. Okay, now we do need to encrypt our passwords, obviously. We're not going to store plain text passwords in the database. So we're going to use something called bcrypt.js for that. So I'm going to open up a new terminal down here and say npm install, and we want bcrypt.js. All right, now we're also going to be dealing with JSON Web Tokens, so I'm going to npm install JSON Web Token. So it's just all one word like that. And then I think that's pretty much, yeah, I think that's all we need as far as dependencies. Okay, so just get those installed, and then let's see, let's go to, we shouldn't need this routes folder anymore, so let's go to our user controller, and this register user function is what I want to work on first, but we do have some stuff to bring in. So, whoops, wrong syntax. So let's bring in JSON Web Token, so we'll say JWT, and we're going to require JSON Web Token. We also want to bring in bcrypt to hash our passwords. So the variable here is bcrypt, but when you require it, just make sure you add JS. So we want to require bcrypt JS. And then what else? We also want our express async handler. So we'll call this async handler and set that to require and then express async handler. And we also want to bring in our user model. So const user and set that to require. And that's going to be up one level in models and then user model. Now let's just make these asynchronous because again we're working with Mongoose, we're also working with bcrypt, which is also we also deal with asynchronous methods there too as well. So we're going to make these async. And then remember we have to wrap these in async handler to handle exceptions. So let's say async handler and just wrap the entire thing. So I'm just going to copy that and here, wrap it, and same thing with this. Wrap that one as well. Good. So let's see. Now we're going to start to work in the register. Now, when we send a request to this endpoint, API users, post requests to register a user, we're going to have some body data. So I'm going to destructure that. It's going to be name, email, and password. We're going to get that from request.body. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of validation here. So I'm going to say if not name or if not email or if not password. If none of those are included, then let's do a res.status. It's going to be a 400, which is a bad request. And then we're going to throw a new error and we'll say, please add all fields. And let's check that out for now. So if we come back over here and we hit API users with post, we're going to get this, please fill in all fields. So now in the body here, we can add in our name and email and our password. I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I send with those fields, then that works. I get back register user, which is what I want. So let's see. Next thing is to check to see if the user exists. So let's say check if user exists. So we're going to first create a variable called user exists, and we're going to await and then use the user model. And there's a method called find one, and we want to find the user by the email that's passed in. So if that includes something, say if user exists, then we're going to want to send an error because obviously we don't want to register the user if they already exist. So let's say res.status, and we're going to do a 400 and then throw an error, and we'll say user already exists. Oops, exists. Okay, and then we'll keep going here, and the next thing we want to do is hash the password. So to do that, we use bcrypt. Let's put a comment here. We'll just say hash password, and we can do that by first creating what's called a salt. We need a salt to, or we need to generate a salt to hash the password, and we do that by calling a bcrypt method called gensalt. So let's say bcrypt or bcrypt.gen salt, and it takes in a number of rounds here. 10 is the default, so I'm just going to use 10. And now that we have the salt, we can hash the password. So let's say const hashed, we'll say hashed password, and we'll set that to await on bcrypt, and we have a method called hash, and then that's going to take in two things. One is the plain text password that comes from the form, or in our case Postman, and then next is the salt. and that will give us the hashed password. Next, we want to then create the user. So we can do that. Let's say const user and set that to await. And from the user model, we want to call create, just like we did with the goals. Pass in an object and then the fields that we want, such as name, email, and then we want to make sure that we set password to the hash password. So that will actually create the user. Then we want to just make sure, we want to check that. So let's say if user, okay, so if the user was created, then we're going to res.status 201, which is an OK, and also something was created. And then for the JSON, you could just do the token, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, but I'm also going to send some user data back, like the ID. We'll say _ID user.id. Let's do name user.name, and then let's do email. So user.email, and then we want to have an else here. So else, then we're going to set an error, so status 400, and then throw new error, and we'll say invalid user data, and then just get rid of this last line here. All right, so let's try this out. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to keep these name, email, and password fields and send. And now I get back a 201 created. I get back the ID, the name, and the email. No token yet. We haven't done that yet, but we can now register a user. And if you want to open up Compass, if you did install it and you check the database and you look in the users collection, you should see this, or whatever name and stuff you used. So now we can register a user. Next, what do we want to do next? Let's just do the login functionality. So basically, matching the email and password, and then after that we'll do the token generation, and we'll respond because I want the token to be sent whether the user registers or logs in. But let's just do the login functionality first, which is going to be really simple. We're just going to get the email and password that's sent in the body. So we want that from request.body. And then we can just say const user, set that to await. And we want the user model. And yeah, let's do .find1. And we're going to find by the email. Once we do that, we have to match the password. So this will, let's say, check for user email. All right, and then let's check the password. So I'm going to say if user, and we want to compare the passwords. Now remember, the password in the database, right? If we look here, well, actually we can't see it there. If we look in here, the password is hashed, right? And the password we're going to send to log in is not going to be hashed, so we need to use a bcrypt method called compare to do that. So I'm just going to open up another set of parentheses, and we're going to await on bcrypt.compare, and that's what it'll do. Is it'll compare the plain text password, which is this password that's sent in from the form or from Postman, and then secondly we want to pass in the user, which we just fetched, and the password, which is hashed. So we're going to pass those two things in. All right, now if that all turns out, then we're going to respond with JSON, and we're going to send the same data back that we send if they registered. So this stuff here. So pass that in, and then we'll just have an else. So this if statement right here, let's say else, and then we'll just do the same thing we did up here, which is an error and invalid user data. Or let's say invalid email or invalid credentials. Because we'll actually see this message in our front end when we try to log in. And now let's get rid of that. Okay, so let's at least try to authenticate. So I'm going to go to a new tab. Yeah, we'll just actually open up another one. So let's copy this, and it's going to be a post request to user/login. So if I just send with nothing, I get invalid credentials. If I go to my body and set email to brad@gmail.com, and then we also do password, and my password was just 1 through 6. If I send that, now I get back the user data. All right, so I'm able to match my email and password against the database. So now we want to get into our JSON Web Token. And basically we're going to have to sign the token, and we're going to send that back in both register and login. So we do have to have a secret, and we're going to put that into our .env because it needs to be signed with a specific secret. So let's say JWT_secret, and I'm just going to set it. It can be anything. I'm just going to set it to ABC123. Okay, and then let's just restart the server, because whenever you add a new environment variable, you should restart the server. And then in the user controller, I'm actually going to create a separate function, because we're going to put this in 2 places, both in login and register. So I'm just going to create another function down here to generate a token. We'll say generate JWT. So let's say const and generate token. It's going to take in the ID that's going to be the user ID, because that's what we want to put as the payload. And then we want to return from this function. We're going to use JWT, which we brought in up at the top. This is using the JSON Web Token package. And we're using a method called sign. Sign. And that's going to take in a couple things. First is going to be the payload, the data that we actually want to put in there, which is going to be the ID that is passed into this function. Second is going to be the secret, so process.env. and then JWT_secret. And then third, so we can put a third argument in here of options, and there's an expires in. And you can set this to whatever you want. I'm going to say 30D, which is going to be 30 days. All right, so this will sign a new token with the ID that's passed in with this secret used, and it'll expire in 30 days. So now we can just simply go back up to, let's go to register first. And along with the user data that we pass back, I'm also going to pass back a token, which is we're going to call our generate token. And then we're going to pass in user._ID. Okay, so the user that we register, remember we get the user back, and we're just passing the ID into the generate token function, and then it's going to get put into the actual token. So we'll do the same thing for login. So I'll just copy this, and then once we log in addition to that, we'll get the token. So let's go ahead and try that out. I'm going to, we'll just log in again. So I have the correct information here. I'm going to go ahead and send. And now you'll see in addition to my user data, I have a token. And if I take that token and copy it, and then I go to jwt.io, you can actually put that in here, and it'll show you what it is. So pass that in. And now you can see in the payload, I have an ID, and that's my user's ID. I also have an issued at and an expiration, which is 30 days from now. All right, so this user ID we should be able to get when we send a specific route, we send that token, and that's how we can validate. So the next step now that we can do, let's actually check the register as well. So I'm going to go to this post API users. We'll register a different user here. Let's say John Doe, and we'll just set this to John. Okay, and we'll send. So that registers a new user, and it gives us the token for John. Now, I just want to send this again and make sure, yeah, so we get user already exists. So all of our functionality up to this point is working. Now we want to be able to protect routes. and I'm going to use this getMe right here. This is actually going to be private. So let's say private, and we'll use this as an example of how to protect a route. Now the way we do it was with middleware. We create a custom piece of middleware. And remember, middleware is a function that runs during the request response cycle. So when we send a route or send a request to a route or an endpoint, this function that we create is going to run and check the token. So let's create a file here called Auth Middleware.js. And let's see, we want to bring in a couple things here. So JSON Web Token, so JWT, we want to bring that in from JSON Web Token. We want to bring in our async handler. So const async handler equals require express async handler. We want to bring in the user model. So const user and set that to require. And we're in middleware, so we want to go up one level into models and user model. So we're going to create a function here called protect. So let's say const protect. We're going to use async handler. So make sure you add that, and then async. We'll have an async function, and this is going to take in here request, res, and next, since this is middleware. And let's just export this so I don't forget. So down here, module exports, and we're going to export protect. So as far as what we want to do in here, first thing I'm going to do is just initialize a variable called token. And then we want to check, and the way excuse me, the way that this is going to be sent is in the headers. In the HTTP headers, you have an authorization object. So that's what we want to check. So let's say if request.headers, so with Express, that's how we can access the headers, and we want to look in authorization. So we want to just check, make sure that that's there, and we want to check to see if it starts with bearer. So the reason for that is when the token is sent in the authorization header, you don't have to type this, but it's formatted like this. So bearer space and then whatever the token is. All right, because we're bearing the token, it's a bearer token. So we want to make sure that it starts with bearer. So we can do that by just taking this, and we'll paste that in, and we can say dot, and we'll use the JavaScript method starts with, and we want to make sure it starts with bearer. All right, let's close that up. So let's see if that is true. So let's say if, then we're going to add a try catch here. And in the try, the first thing we want to do is get the token from the bearer header. Because remember how it's formatted. It's bearer space and then the token. So I'm going to actually we'll put a comment here and say get token from header. So token, which is the variable we initialized above, we're going to set to request.header, headers.authorization, authorization, and we're going to use .split, because what I'm doing is getting the token from that bearer space token. So what split does, it'll turn this into an array, and if we split by the space, so remember we have bearer space token, and what this split will do is it'll turn this into an array where the text bearer is the first item or the 0 index, and the token is the second item or the 1 index. So we're just going to put here we want the 1 index, so that'll give us just the token. Then we want to verify the token, so I'm going to say const, we're going to have a variable called decoded, and we're going to set that to JWT, which is our JSON Web Token package, and then there's a verify method. So this takes in the token itself and then the secret. So remember that's in process.env. and then JWT_secret. Okay, next we want to get user from the token, because the token has the user ID as a payload. we also want to assign it to request.user so that we can access request.user in any route that's protected. So let's say await and then user. So from the user model, we're going to use find by ID, and the ID is going to be in the decoded object. Okay, because this right here, when we do verify, that will allow us to get the payload, or that will decode it so that we can get the payload, which is the ID. And remember, we set the ID in the token. If we go, let's see, right here, when we signed it, we set the ID. So we could put anything in here. You know, we could put the user name or whatever we want inside of the token payload, and then we could get it here. So what we're doing is finding the user by the ID that's in the token, but I don't want the password hash. Okay, even though the password is hashed, I don't want that here. So we can use .select, and if we put a string in here of -password, then it won't include the password. Okay, so we won't have request.user or .password or whatever. And then we just want to call next, because at the end of our middleware, we want to be able to call the next piece of middleware. Now, if there's an error, then we're going to first of all just console log the error, and then we'll just do a res.status of 401, because 401 means not authorized. And we'll throw new error, and we'll pass in here, we'll just say not authorized. Okay, and then let's see, right after this second curly brace, we just want to say if not token. So if there's no token at all, then we'll say res.status, and that's going to be a 401, and throw new error, and we'll say not authorized, no token, and then that should do it. So again, just to kind of go through, we're checking for the authorization header, making sure it's a bearer token. Then we're assigning the token to this variable. We're decoding and verifying the token. We're getting the user from the token, calling the next piece of middleware. If none of this, if something goes wrong, then we're going to send a 401 and say not authorized. If there's no token at all, not authorized. So wherever we want to use this, we can simply go into the route file. So for instance, user routes, this /me, right now I can go to it, right? If we go to, where is it? User /me, I can hit it, right? And it's just sending this message. But I want to protect that. So what I'm going to do is bring in the protect function from our middleware. So protect, and set that, or get that from /middleware/auth middleware, and all we have to do is add it as a second argument. So we can just say protect like that, and then let's try to hit that route again, and you can see we get not authorized, no token. So now let's log in. So right here, I already did. I'll just hit this again. So I logged in with the correct email and password. And now I'm going to grab this token and go to my protected route, which is user /me. And you could do this a couple ways. You could add here in not here as a param, but as a header. You could add authorization and then put the token. Or with Postman, you can just click on authorization. You can choose bearer token and just simply paste that in. I don't think that's the right one. So if we paste that in and now we send, now we can hit that route. Now, if this token is changed in any way, like that 4 on the end, if I just take that off and I put a 5 and I send, we're going to get not authorized. It doesn't say no token because we have a token. It just failed. It's not the right one. All right, now I'm going to put the right one in. And remember, we get the user ID is inside of this token. And when it goes through our middleware, we set the user to this request.user. So any route that I use the token in, such as this getMe, which is right here, I have access to request.user. So I can use that ID to whatever I want, to validate certain goals or whatever. So let's add to this, because all I want this to do is return whatever the logged in user data is. So I'm going to get rid of this, and let's say const, and then I'm going to just destructure, let's say underscore ID, name, and email. I'm going to destructure that from the user. So let's say await, and then the user model, and then we'll do find by ID, and we should now have access to request.user.id because we set that in the middleware. And then we'll say res.status 200 and then .json, and we'll send an object with, we'll say ID, and set that to our underscore ID, name, we'll just say name and email. So now whatever user's logged in, when they hit this route, they should get their own info. So if I go ahead and send with that token, I get back Brad Traversy, so email and my ID. Now if I log in as another user, such as John, so let's go to the login route and let's do John at Gmail and send, and then I get this token. I'm going to take that one, and this one should have John's ID. So if I go ahead and I add this here and I hit the getMe route, now it's going to show John. So this request.user is going to be whatever user has authenticated. All right, so now what we can do is protect all of our goal routes, because right now we can probably let's just leave the login open. We can close that up. We can close up that one. So we have API/goals, which right now just will get all of the goals. But what I would like to do is protect that route for one thing, and then have it return only the user's goals. So let's close up user routes, close up Auth Middleware, and I think we're all set with our user controller as well. So now we're going to open up goal controller and goal routes, because we want to protect these routes. So in our goal routes, let's bring in the protect middleware function. So we'll say protect, we want to require / middleware / auth middleware, and then right here where we do .get and then get goals, I'm just going to put protect before that. So that's all you have to do to protect a route. So now if I come back to API/goals and send, I'm not authorized because I didn't send a token. So I actually want to protect all of these. So set goal, let's say protect. For delete goal, we're going to protect that, and for update goal. All right. Now let's go back to our goal controller now that all those are protected and private. And like I said, right now we're getting all of the goals in the database, but I want to get only the specific user's goals. So in this find here, let's add an object, and we're going to say we're the user, because remember, now we have a user field on the goals, which is a relationship to the user model. And we can access request.user because of the protect middleware, and we just want to match the ID. All right, and that's all we have to add here. So now if I send with, let's get a token, so I'll go to login, and let's use John. So I'll grab John's token, and let's see, we want to add that to authorization, bearer token, and we'll paste that in and send, and we get nothing. So let's add a goal as John. But before we do that, let's go to our set goal and make it so that the user is actually included. Because right now what we're doing is just saying create and just using the text in the body. So all we have to do is also set a user to request.user.id. All right, so we'll save that. Now let's open up a new tab, and let's hit this same endpoint, API goals, make a post request, and remember we have to add text. Oops, this is params. We want to go to body. So body, we want to go here, and let's add text, and we'll say this is John's goal 1. And if I just send that now, you'll see I get not authorized. But if I put in John's token in authorization, bearer token, oops, that's not right. I want to get John's token. And let's send, and then we get back John's goal 1. All right, let's actually do another one. We'll say John's goal 2, send that, John's goal 2. Now, if I come back over to make a GET request and I have John's token and I send, we're going to see John's goal 1 and John's goal 2. So now let's log in with a different user. So I'm going to go to the login endpoint and we're going to do Brad@Gmail. Send that. I'm going to get Brad's token. And then I'm going to go to the get where we make a GET request. And I shouldn't see, if I put in Brad's token, I shouldn't see John's goals. So if I send, you'll see I get an empty array. Now, if I go to add a goal as Brad, so let's go back to post API goals. I don't know why that's there. And then let's change the token. So authorization bearer token, and change that to Brad's token. And in the body, we'll say this is Brad's goal 1, and we'll send that. And now I see this is Brad's goal 1. And if I go back to get my goals and send, and I have Brad's token in, that's the only one I'm going to see. All right, now for the update and delete, we want to make sure that Brad can't delete John's goal and vice versa, or update each other's goals. You should only be able to delete and update your own goals. So we're first going to bring in the user model up top in addition to the goal model. So here, let's say user. Okay, so we're going to go down to update now. Okay, so in our update, we're getting the goal by the ID in the URI and the URL, and then we're checking for the goal, and then we're updating it with find by update. Now, right before we call that find by update, we first want to get the user. So let's say const user equals await user model, and we're going to use find by ID, and the ID is going to be in request.user.id. Okay, so that's the logged in user's ID. And then we're going to say if not user, so if the user doesn't exist, I'm just going to put a comment here. We'll just say check for user. Then let's do a res.status and do a 401 with which is not authorized. And let's throw a new error. And here we'll just say user not found. And then we want to make sure that, like I said, we can't update each other's goals. So we're going to check for the, let's say, goal, and then the goal has a user field on it, which is an object ID, and we want to turn that to a string before we check it. So we're going to say toString, and then say if that is not equal to the user.id. Okay, and the user is the one that we just got up here from the logged in user. So if those don't match, actually let's put a comment here. We'll say make sure make sure the logged in user matches the goal user. Okay, so if that's not true, then we're just going to res.status 401, and then throw new error, and we'll say user not authorized. Okay, so again, we're just checking for the user, making sure that's there, and then we're matching the user, logged in user, to the goals user, make sure they match. And we're going to do the same thing with delete. So I'm going to just copy these parts here, and then in delete, right after we check for the goal, paste that in. All right, so now if let's see, I'm going to open up a new tab, and I want to do a delete. So I want to say delete request, Remember, that has to have an ID. So I'm going to take Brad's goal ID right here. And right now I don't have any token selected in my authorization, so I should just get not authorized, no token. However, if I log in as John, so I'm going to change in the login route here, I'm going to change that to John. And then I'm going to take John's token, and I'm going to use that to try to delete Brad's goal. So let's go to authorization and then bearer token, and let's paste in John's token. Okay, so again, I'm trying to delete Brad's goal. That's this ID is Brad's goal, and this token is John's. And you'll see if I send, I get user not authorized. So there's no way I can do that. If I log in as Brad, though, I should be able to delete it. So let's change that to Brad, correct password, send. And now I'm going to take Brad's token. Feels weird calling to myself in the third person. So here I'm going to put in Brad's token and send, and that deletes it. So if I go back to the get request and send, now there's no goal. Brad has no goals. Brad's a loser. But yeah, so now we have complete CRUD functionality with authentication and authorization. Okay, we authenticate by going against the database and making sure we have the correct email and password, and then we authorize by sending the right token to the route, to the correct route. So that's it. Now we have an authentication, an API that has authentication. So obviously you can use this for other projects, other APIs. I think we're pretty much done with the back end. So in the next video, we'll be doing the front end, and I want to use React along with Redux and Redux Toolkit. But of course, you could use this API and create any front end, Views, Felt, Angular, whatever you want to use. All right, so that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you stuck through the whole thing, thanks. I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.